good morning. If I haven't met you yet, my name is Mark Massacre. I am the Satellite Director for Youth Unlimited YFC in Woodstock. I just want to say thank you, first of all, before I even get started. This church has a special place in my heart as a church, and then many individuals within it. If you don't know our ministry, we are, you may have known it as Youth for Christ. We're now Youth Unlimited, YFC. And we are a parachurch organization, a nonprofit, and we seek to love and serve youth and share the hope of Jesus with them in the community. And we do that by partnering with local churches. And this church has been such an encouragement to me personally, and I know our team as we seek to serve youth. I want to introduce my team because they're here this morning, and I want to give just a little snapshot before we jump into things, and just kind of like give you a quick update about who we are and what we're doing. So I'm going to embarrass them. So Kelly, if you can stand. Yeah. Okay, so this is Kelly Rigglesworth. She runs a hot lunch drop-in called The Table. We love food programs like the carrot. I think there's the raw carrot, sorry. I think they're so important, and The Table kind of is a food ministry. We have about upwards of 80 plus high school students that come to this program every Tuesday at lunch, sometimes racing to find a seat. And it's an opportunity for us to love and serve them. We hang out and play games, a place of like first contact and building relationship with them. And so Kelly's been doing that for I think 3 years now, and it's been great. Yeah, cool. Beside her is Laurel. If you want to stand up, Laurel Jones has been with us just over a year, and she's helped us kind of spearhead the renovation of our youth center downtown. And it's kind of converted from a gym to a cafe drop-in with the hopes to make it more accessible to a broader number of youth in the community. And we're really excited for that. It's a place where we can be running small groups such as Alpha, which we just started this last week, and other programs. So she's great. And I'd really encourage you to connect with them and talk to them, hear more about their ministries they're doing downtown. I'm, in addition to kind of overseeing some of the fundraising and ministry stuff, I'm also running a Monday night sports program that is volleyball and basketball with an awesome team of volunteers. And that's just getting going tomorrow night. So we're excited for that. All right, we have a lot to get through, and I'm going to try to move through it as quickly as possible. And I'm going to do my best to kind of stay on theme with what Mike has been doing, but I'm just kind of parachuting in, so we'll see how it goes. And I might take some liberties to just kind of give it my own flavor. So when Mike asked me what to say, I feel like every week when we welcome youth into our programs, I feel the gulp. I can feel the nerves that this question brings as these kids start coming in. What do you say to today's youth, to those we're trying to share the hope of Jesus with? And it can be really bring a lot of anxiety and nerves. You can just feel it in your body. What do I say in these moments? This is really relevant to us and to our team, and I know to you as a church. And so we're going to dive in today and look at Paul's missionary trip to Corinth. So he's just left Athens, and we're going to jump into Corinth. But before that, we'll start really quickly how Mike's always been starting it. That knowing what to say isn't the same as having the right answer. That if you get into a place where you're faced with a really difficult question and you're not sure how to navigate it, you don't always have to have the right answer. But if you can remember this is really helpful. Try to find what the question is behind the question. What are they really asking in that moment? Is there a biblical truth that you can speak to that? Share from your personal experience. And this is a big one because this really diffuses conversations or things when they start getting a little bit tense. You can really diffuse things because it's hard to argue with what your own personal experience is. Just share from your personal experience. And it also makes it really relatable, right? You start speaking from this place of the shared human experience, and it provides connection points for people to be able to be like, oh yeah, I could see how you get there. And ask more follow-up questions and keep the conversation going. So if you don't have the right answer, and oftentimes it's hard to have the right answer, if we can try to start from this place, it's helpful. Okay, so we're going to jump into Acts 18 today. And I like to get pretty oriented in terms of the context of what's going on to a story before we really start jumping into it. So we're going to quickly try to get oriented to the story before we read the passage. So who are the Corinthians? Who is it that Paul is kind of walking into? What is this whole context? As you've been looking at Paul's second missionary journey, he's been kind of traveling around this Mediterranean rim, planting churches and sharing about Jesus. We kind of zoom in here into this kind of closer area. He's just kind of left Athens, and is really kind of hard and difficult ending to that, kind of mocked. And so as he's leaving here, he sends Timothy and Silas back up to kind of check on the churches north, and then he travels around just over here. And if we zoom in even closer, this is kind of like a land bridge that kind of connects mainland Greece to the Peloponnese Peninsula. And so what you have here is this isthmus, or this land bridge that's coming across here. Paul would have, if I'm oriented right, this would be the Aegean Sea and the Ionian Sea up here. Paul's kind of coming across this land bridge, across this isthmus here, which is this, I don't know if you can see it, but this is, I think, a more modern picture, but you can see this line right through the center there. What that is it's a canal that connects these two seas together. And so what happens is this really creates a really big maritime hub, because this is like a shortcut where boats and sailors can come, and it saves them this really extended trip down over the Peloponnesian southern tip that's pretty dangerous and also just takes a lot longer. And so this is a shortcut that they could come in here in the Aegean Sea and get over to the Ionian Sea. Back then it wasn't a canal, it was most likely just this 4-mile stretch of rolling logs that they would pull these ships across. And so you had this huge hub. Corinth was this city that was often a meeting place for people from the east and from the west, and they would kind of come in here. This isthmus here was also the place of the Isthmus Games, which is second only to the Olympic Games at the time. And so there's this center place where the world would just kind of connect. It was this cosmopolitan city, this mix of religions and ethnic diversity. It was this huge hub. Oftentimes, Roman soldiers, too, they would retire if they survived their time in the Roman military. They would retire in Corinth. It was this hub also of freed men looking to live free lifestyles. They wanted to just make a name for themselves and pursue any pleasures that they ever wanted to. It was about self-realization and self-glorification and bringing honor to self and elevating the self. It was all about who you were and how you could just pursue anything you ever wanted in terms of your passions and dreams. There was this Acropolis, or this high plateau, Acrocorinth, in the city, and it made for this great fortified place where you could have a strong defensive position. They could see far into the distance, and on top of this, there was a temple to Aphrodite. And I can't say for sure in Paul's time if this was still happening, but in years past, in the history of Corinth, there would be upwards of 1,000 prostitutes that would come down off of this Acrocorinth, the Acropolis, and into the city. And it was just, it was known for its moral laxity and kind of the people pursuing self and their pleasures and desires. So this is Corinth. This is what Paul is kind of walking into here. He kind of crosses over this land bridge and into Corinth. There's a German theologian that says, with today's postmodern mood, we may compare the self-sufficient, self-congratulatory culture of Corinth, coupled with an obsession about peer group prestige, success and competition, their devaluing of tradition and universals. All of this provides an embarrassing close model of a postmodern context for the gospel in our own times. Even given the huge historical difference and distances in so many other respects, 1 Corinthians, the letter that was written to the Corinthian people, so Corinth, stands in distinct position of relevance to our own times. So if we're kind of like asking, who are these people? In some ways, it really represents a lot of this like modern context that we are navigating right now with the gospel, and how do we communicate that? It's this postmodern context, and truth seems to be subjective, and everything is about the self. Okay, so how's Paul doing? That's Corinth. That's kind of what he's walking into. How's Paul doing? Well, he's been stoned in Lystra, beaten with rods and jailed in Philippi, attacked by an unruly mob in Thessalonica, mocked in Athens, and about to be reviled in Corinth. He's in a really actually fragile state. And we always think of St. Paul or Paul as this strong, dynamic biblical figure, but there's this fragility to Paul in this story where he comes in. He even writes in 1 Corinthians, when I came to you, brothers, I was with you in weakness and in fear and much trembling. There was a sense that Paul, as he was coming into this place of like bravado, of all this confidence and these ex-soldiers and pursuing the self and honoring and glorifying the self, that Paul was actually in this like drastic place of lack of self-confidence, that he was kind of broken, which provides a really interesting contrast that I want to explore a little bit later. Okay, so that's the context. Sorry, that's like the kind of the boring teachy time, but we'll get into the passage now. Okay, so Acts 18. After Athens, Paul left and went to Corinth. He found a Jew named Aquila and a native of Pontus. Pontus is actually just part of Asia Minor, so just to the north of where Paul would have grown up. But he had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all Jews to leave Rome, and he went to see them. And because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them and worked for them, for they were tent makers by trade. And he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and tried to persuade Jews and Greeks. When Silas and Timothy arrived from Macedonia, Paul was occupied with the word, testifying to the Jews that the Christ, the Messiah, was in fact Jesus. And when they opposed and reviled him, he shook out his garments, and he said to them, your blood be on your own heads, I am innocent. From now on, I will go to the Gentiles. And he left there and went to the house of the man named Titius Justus, a worshiper of God. His house was next door to the synagogue. Crispus, the ruler of the synagogue, house was next door to the synagogue. Sorry, that might be wrong here. Sorry, so it's Crispus, the ruler of the synagogue, believed in the Lord together with his entire household. There we go. That's a mistake on my part. With his entire household, and many of the Corinthians, hearing Paul, believed and were baptized. And the Lord said to Paul, he comes to him in a vision in Corinth, and he says, do not be afraid, but go on speaking, and do not be silent. For I am with you, and no one will attack you to harm you, for I have many in this city who are my people. This is really beautiful. I love this vision. I was reading in a Bible, and it had this in red letters, which just kind of like, I don't know, for some reason gave me shivers, because this is after Jesus has died and has raised and returned to heaven, but these are red letters because this is Jesus. He's visiting Paul. This is a sidebar, but I always find this really interesting, that Paul is considered an apostle. But an apostle is somebody who's journeyed with Jesus, like face to face in his life when Jesus was with us. But Paul never did that. But we consider him an apostle because the conversion experience he had, the revelation of Jesus coming him into that original vision on the road to Damascus, is like such this radical experience that Paul has seen Jesus. And he is now this apostle of Jesus and traveling around. And so Jesus comes to Paul again in Corinth, in this place of being fragile and kind of broken. And he says, do not be afraid, but go on speaking. Do not be silent, for I am with you. And no one will attack you to harm you, for I have many in the city who are my people. Now, there's some momentum behind what Paul was doing. Crispus, the synagogue leader, had followed with him and come back to the house of Titius Justus and had believed in the Lord. And then Crispus, the synagogue ruler, his household believed in the Lord. And then from there it says that many believed in the Lord. And so there's this momentum, but you see Paul almost like expecting the other shoe to drop. With everything that has happened, that some sort of riot or mob is going to come up against him. And this is how fragile that he is, that even with this good momentum happening here, that Jesus comes and speaks over him. It's this beautiful moment of God's heart for Paul, ministering to him, but also exhorting him and challenging him and saying, I have all these people in this city. You have to keep on speaking. And I actually think it's really challenging for me, because sometimes it's easy for us to focus on, we want to love people and serve them, and that sometimes can be really easy. But as we're doing this series of what to say, it's this idea of that speaking is really vital and really important. Don't be afraid. Keep speaking. I'm with you. I have many people in this city that are still to come and be with me. It's this beautiful snapshot of God's heart, the Father's heart for Paul and for the people in Corinth. And it says at the end there, he stayed a year and 6 months. This is the whole second missionary journey was about 2.5, 3 years. So the bulk of what Paul did was in Corinth. So he stayed here and kind of planted roots. And I think part of it is this vision from Jesus that is coming and is saying, no, you're not done yet. We have lots of people here to reach. The beautiful thing about this kind of exhortation from Jesus, him meeting with him and encouraging him, is that this is not a new thing for God. God visits his people, and this has been part of Israel's story for a long time. The thing that he's saying to him is part of this kind of you can almost see the formula here, that when God visits his people, there's two things that he's continually trying to remind them of. Do not fear, I am with you. When Joshua was about to take over leadership of Israel, the Lord said to him, do not be frightened and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. When David was walking through the valley of the shadow of death, he wrote, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. When God wanted to comfort his people through the prophet Isaiah, he said, fear not, for I am with you. There's this beautiful heartbeat of God that is consistent throughout Scripture, throughout the whole biblical story, that is saying, don't be afraid. Keep speaking. I'm with you. Okay, so we're going to do something a little bit different here. What to say. I want to just quickly go over 4 things. Where do you even start? I remember sitting in a coffee shop when I had just been hired with Youth Unlimited. Now, at that time, I was in my mid-30s, and sitting there and being watching some high school students walk by. And I had been a youth pastor for about 6 years, and on some level, the youth just kind of came to me, and I organized programming, and we did it. But now, I was in COVID and started a new job, and there was almost nothing that we could do with them. I was where do I even start? How do I build a relationship with these students, or even introduce myself, let alone share who Jesus is with them? So it can be really intimidating. How do we even start to get to the place where we know what to say? How do we get to that place in conversations? So really quickly, just 4 observations that might be helpful for us that we see in this story with Paul. The first thing is he started with what he knew. When he came into Corinth, this really intimidating place, and he's walking across this isthmus, and he sees the Acrocorinth towering over there and all the soldiers and the culture and everything. He started with what he knew. He knew tent making, so he connected with Priscilla and Aquila and formed this amazing friendship which is something that you can like really dive into and kind of like study. It's a beautiful thing. But he connected with them and just started working as a tent maker. And then he was also, at one point, when he was Saul, was a Pharisee. And so he knew the synagogues and he knew teaching. And so this is where Paul started. He just started with what he knew. For us, I was like, so what is it that I would know sitting in that coffee shop and talking with our team? We're like, oh, I know food. And so it might be kind of like silly, but we knew food, and we started there. And now we have 80 students that are coming. And students that connected there are now coming out to the youth center and coming to Alpha. You start with what you know. God has planted you in a context and in a place with people and given you a specific skill set. And so you start with what you know. You move from platform to person. Paul, when he came into Corinth, he went to the synagogue. It's this place that is all about teaching from platform and challenging ideas, and him trying to reorient their whole Jewish understanding of the Messiah around this one person, Jesus, which is a huge task. And the platform can serve really important functions in our life. But I also think, and I think largely, I would argue, that the platform can be really distracting to just personal, relational ministry. The people in our life that we need to sit down with, to open up our lives and be vulnerable with. When things went south at the synagogue, when they started to become abusive towards Paul, he moved really, like literally, next door to Titius Justus' house. And he just moved to the next house. And it became relational and personal. And Crispus, the synagogue leader, followed him and came into this space. And how beautiful is it that the momentum that started in Corinth was actually started in this very personal space. It started with one, Crispus, the synagogue leader. And from there, it was his household. And from there, from that household, it was many. And I think that there's something in here, a model for us to see in terms of ministry, that, you know, the big ideas that we might have, or the hopes of teaching and kind of being in front of people to share all these things, that can be good. But it also can be at times a distraction to what God might have for you with the people that are in your life and the spaces that you can come together with them. 3, know when to walk away. There's a place here where the Jews started to become really abusive and hostile towards Paul. And Paul took off his coat and shook it, and shook the dust off, and he said, the blood is on your heads now, I'm innocent. And there's this moment where Paul, when he comes into a city, he's teaching to the Jews and to the Greeks, but there's almost this shift here where he's now not just looking for the geographical distance for the gospel to spread, but he's almost shifting his focus to like an ethnic distance from God, right? Where he's saying, okay, like, this is a dead end. And he shook off his coat, and he's shifted his attention now to the Gentiles and to speaking to them. And I just want to say that I think this needs to be done with prayer and discerning, because I think a lot of times we want to just walk away and not push in, and so you don't want to just be too eager. I also suggest not like shaking your coat in people's faces when you're doing it. But I do think that there's something here that gives us permission to know that there are some ground that is just not receptive to the seed of the gospel. And that what could be a barrier and a stumbling block for some, for others, is like this spring of living water in a dry land for others. And to prayerfully and with discernment be able to understand that and find those who are going to be receptive. And 4, embrace weakness. And this we start to see a little bit in the story, but we see really when we start opening Paul's letter to the Corinthians. He tried to teach, and at some point Paul reaches the end of his own skill set, where it's like, I can't find the words and order them in a certain way to help you understand that Jesus is the Messiah, that he's the Christ. I can't do it. He reaches the end of himself, and there's a sort of weakness in that. But there's also this fragility that he comes into Corinth with, that Paul, as he starts talking in Corinthians in his letter, he starts actually leveraging this weakness as part of his message to the people. And he says, And I, when I came to you, brothers, I did not come proclaiming to you the testimony of God with lofty speech or wisdom, for I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. And I was with you in weakness and in fear and much trembling. And I want us just to hold on to this idea of, in this place of ego, of bravado, of self-glorification and seeking your own pleasures and everything, I want us to just pay attention to this right here, the weakness and the struggle with self-confidence in the midst of this kind of context, this contrast. Okay, really quickly, I want to look at this. So if we give you kind of an example here, this is actually a question that I got from a girl this last week in Alpha. So we were talking about it and just kind of wrestling with it. And she says, why would I believe in a God who gives cancer to people? So this is a question coming out of this kind of postmodern context and people that are wrestling with it. And so really quickly, I want you to just discuss amongst yourselves. I'm only going to give you like 10 seconds here. But what is the question behind the question? There could be multiple, but just kind of like chat. What's the question behind the question? Why would I believe in a God who gives cancer to people? All right, go. Discuss. All right, we're going to, for the sake of time, we're going to cut that a little short. Any ideas? Anybody want to kind of shout out what might be the question behind the question that this girl's wrestling with? Is God really powerful? Is he power hungry? Is he just like hoarding all the power to himself and he's in charge of all of the difficult things going on, the good and the bad? Okay, yeah. Is there a God? Yeah, for sure. Why does bad stuff happen to good people? Yeah, why is he punishing me? Yeah, oh, yeah. Yeah. And you even saw it on the bumper video that happened up here, right? It's like, why doesn't God just heal my mom who's been sick? They're difficult questions. There's a lot of questions that start surfacing that are behind it. And I want to say we need to have like a posture of humility with this stuff, that we can't come into stuff really assuming that we have all of the right answers, because these are heavy and emotional things that people are navigating. So there needs to be humility and compassion, empathy for people that are struggling through difficult stuff like this. But I think part of it is like, is God good? Can I put my trust in him? Because in this culture, I just see people trusting themselves and seeking things for themselves. And so I'm just going to hold on to that myself, the power to myself. And I'm going to just try to get more followers and more likes and make a name for myself and lift up my own life. And in that, maybe I can save myself. Right? Is God good? Can I trust him? Is he power hungry? On some level, I feel like I'm cheating. I'm doing a whole sermon, and I'm going to tell you that the way to respond to this is to give the cliche Sunday school answer and to just preach Jesus. But Paul, he said, I came into this context of self-glorification and lifting yourself up, and I came in weakness with no confidence in myself, and all I could do is preach Jesus, but not just preach Jesus, preach him crucified. And so as we carry this message of the cross into this postmodern context where truth always centers around the self, I think there's something here. And the answers might look different in various contexts, but here's why preaching Jesus and preaching him crucified is so important. Because in this, we don't see a God that is obsessed with power and just trying to like hoard it for himself. He's actually a God that gives up power. He empties himself and comes to us. And he gives up his life so that we might find life. And I have to think that the youth that we're working with and the people and the friends and the family that we are talking to Jesus about, that as much as they want likes and attention and accolades and find the elevation of the self, that still the most meaningful expressions of hope and meaning in this world are connected to acts of self-emptying. Whether that's embodied through their parents who have given up themselves so that they can have life, or a friend who's given a helping hand. But in the cross, we see this beautiful emptying of self and power and giving himself to us. And in this, we can't hold on to this power-hungry God. And for this girl that is wrestling with, why would I believe in a God who gives suffering, who gives cancer? You see in the cross a God that embraces suffering on behalf of us. But he also stands with us in the midst of all of it. He is now this high priest that sympathizes with us in the midst of all of this suffering. And we don't have really tidy answers for why all this stuff happens, but in the cross, in Jesus and him crucified, we see a God who gives up himself, empties himself of this power, and embraces suffering. And he comes to us. So for us, as we navigate these conversations with people, as we try to figure out what to say, I want us to kind of hear Jesus showing up in this beautiful vision where he says, do not be afraid, but go on speaking and do not be silent, for I'm with you. I'm standing with you in the midst of the fragility, the brokenness, the suffering, the sickness. I am with you. Do not be afraid. For I have many in this city who are my people. There's a beautiful heartbeat of God that as he looks over Corinth here in the Gulf of Corinth, where Paul looks at this city with tired eyes, disillusioned, discouraged, that God looks at this city, a very particular place, a city with people that have lives that are in the marketplace and living in responsibilities. God looks at this and says, keep speaking, don't be afraid. I have many people here still. And for us, God looks at these cities the same way. Keep speaking. Don't be afraid, I'm with you. I have many people here. So how is it that we are coming into that context with tired eyes, discouraged and disillusioned? And what is it that God wants to speak over you, to encourage you, to exhort you, to give you strength, that we can speak of Jesus and him crucified, that we can walk in that cruciform life ourselves and participate with him in that life, that we might reach all people? Whether it starts here in Innerkip or Woodstock, Oxford County, to the very ends of the earth, that all might know the hope that is in Jesus and the freedom from the shackles of sin. Amen. I think we're inviting the worship team up now. I'm new here, so I don't know how we transition this end part. Perfect. Let me say this in closing as they're kind of getting set up. We don't do this to win people for our own side. We don't do this to be right. We do this in love for others. And Paul speaks of this in 1 Corinthians. He says if you're doing all of this stuff, he's writing to this whole context we're looking at in Acts. He's saying, if you're doing all of this, but you're doing it without love, you're just like this resounding gong. You're just making noise. And so as we sit down with our friends, as we move from platform to person, we start with what we know. Would you challenge yourself to look in the mirror and say, what is my heart for God and for others? Has he given me the love that I need to speak of God and his crucifixion? Let me close in prayer. God, I thank you for this church. I thank you for their love for you and for the community around them. I pray, God, that you would walk with them, that they would not be afraid, that they would feel your Spirit strengthening them as they hold on to the truth that you are with them. And would they keep speaking? And by your Spirit, would you give them the words that they would know what to say? We pray all these things in your name. Amen. Maybe you, like me this morning, you feel weak, maybe fragile, a little beaten up in life. And I just want to say that's okay. That actually, that's a beautiful place for God's work to begin. That His power is made perfect in our weakness. That we can be a community of those who are weak. That beauty in that jar of clay, that as it breaks, God's glory begins to shine and He does beautiful things in our community. Glory be to God, Him who came to us and gave up His life for us. Pray all these things in your name. Amen. Go in peace.